I've run out of greetings in French. It feels like ancient history already, but almost a full calendar year ago I made 2 videos about Larousse and Ligier, covering their history. There was another team from France from around that same time frame, but I didn't lend their story much thought in the beginning. It just looked like a team that was underfunded and slow and then died a death. But then, a commenter suggested I look into it, and it was much more interesting than I reckoned it would be. This is the story of a team that came from the humblest beginnings and got to show out in the pinnacle of motorsport. Today, we cover the tale of Automobile Gonfaronnaises Sportives, or, for simplicity's sake, AGS. Our story begins with a man named Henri Julien, born in the town of Gonfaron, an hour from the Mediterranean coast. He was a mechanic who operated a service station called the Garage de l'Avenir and built race cars on the side. He raced professionally for 15 years through the 50s and 60s, but never got any farther than Formula 3. After he retired from racing, he decided to found AGS in 1969 as a constructor. The lead designer role would be given to Julien's apprentice, Belgian Christen van der Plein. They spent 8 years building chassis in the Formula Renault Europe series, fetching themselves some middling successes. They made the jump to European Formula 2 in 1978, but they truly wouldn't hit their stride until around the turn of the 80s. By 1980, they had gotten their first 2 wins in any discipline at Pau and Zandvoort with Richard Delest, which would prove to be the peak of his documented racing career. In 1982, they scored their first double podium at Vallelunga with Pascal Faber and Philippe Streiff, 2 names that will definitely come up later. Streiff would be the better of the 2 drivers, finishing 6th in points that year. Streiff would get the team's 3rd win in a rain-shortened race at Brands Hatch in 1984, ending the year 4th in points. As F2 gave way to F3000 in 1985, AGS continued to be a consistent point-scoring outfit, with Streiff finishing the year in 8th, with 1 podium to his name. It was after these successes that Julien's crew made that final jump, in the most improbable way I've ever seen. As a works outfit, AGS took the 1986 season off, selling chassis instead to Equipe Danielson, who only ran part-time. A returning Delest and Alain Ferta produced negligible results, but this was of no real importance to the boys back at the shop. Julien and the boys had gotten their hands on old parts from the dead Renault team, who had pulled out of F1 the previous year. Those parts went to good use. AGS's first F1 car, the JH21C, penned by van der Plein, was a bulky, hunchbacked Frankenstein's monster of parts from the old F2 cars and the 1985 Renault F1 car, powered by an asthmatic Motori Moderni turbocharged V6, the same model that Minardi used. It was given its first test run by Didier Pironi, making his first runs in a Formula 1 car since his accident at Hockenheim where he smashed up his legs. AGS made its F1 debut at the 1986 Italian Grand Prix, driven by F3000 standout Ivan Capelli. Jesus Christ, I cannot escape this man. That's 3 videos in a row where I've mentioned him. Anyhow, he qualified 25th for Monza, only beating out the 2 Acela cars of Alex Caffi and Piercarlo Ghinzani on pace. By 3 seconds. A puncture would be their undoing after 31 laps, placing them in 15th. Capelli qualified 25th again at the next race at Estoril, this time beating Hugh Rotengatter's Zakspeed and Alan Berg in the Acela. They would be much less fortunate this time around. The clutch died after just 6 laps, classifying Capelli in dead last. That would be the last of their efforts in 1986, but they would be back in a big way the next year. 1987 looked to be AGS's first full-time season in F1, which was a shock considering they were still running the whole show out of the gas station in Gonfaron. Shocking as the logistics may be, the move still made some sense after the reinstitution of naturally aspirated engines. They could spend a lot less money and still be somewhat competitive. They got a supply of Cosworth DFCs to run in their new car, the JH22. Van der Plein made some alterations to the JH21C that made it look less like a mistake of nature, and to his credit, he did a good job. This design looks a lot slicker. AGS was a one-car team, driven by a returning Pascal Faber, who did pretty much nothing. Pascal could be relied upon to keep the car in one piece, but he was never a threat for points. He recorded a best finish of 9th twice in back-to-back races at Paul Ricard and Silverstone. After DNQing in 3 of his last 4 races, he was replaced by Brazilian Roberto Moreno, who made his first 2 F1 starts with the team. He was an immediate improvement behind the wheel, leading the team to its first Formula 1 point with a 6th-place finish at the season finale in Australia. This would put Moreno on a lot of teams' radars, but for now, he would return to F3000. Moreno's 1 point would be enough for 12th in the Constructors' Championship, and their finishing positions relative to other naturally aspirated teams would net them 3rd in the Colin Chapman Trophy hunt, 4 points behind LaRousse, and a ton behind champions Tyrrell. Our old friend Philippe Strife would be signed away from Tyrrell to drive for 1988, and the team got an important backer in the Bouygues Group, a French civil engineering and telecommunications company, who looked to support not only the racing activity, but also the completion of a new headquarters in Gonfaronnaises, finally moving out of that cramped, tiny gas station. There was a lot of potential for AGS to improve and thrive alongside its French big brothers. Strife qualified well with Van der Plein's new JH23, flirting with the top 10 week in and week out, but come race day, something would always go wrong. The car would break down if he did so much as breathe on it wrong. AGS was a points threat regularly, but Lady Luck spurned them at pretty much every single occasion. A brake issue took them out early at Interlagos. A throttle rod broke on the formation lap at Monaco. Strife was fighting for 4th place with Nelson Piquet at Montreal, but his day ended prematurely after hitting the wall. Strife crashed again at Detroit after 15 laps in a battle with Derek Warwick, a performance that possibly could have been as good as 5th. These 2 retirements would be the beginning of a 6-race-long streak that extended through a crash on lap 8 at Hungary. The wheels officially began to fall apart then. The Bouygues Group was unimpressed with the team's performances, so they withdrew completely, pulling their logos from the car and leaving their new factory unfinished. This was combined with Christian Van der Plein leaving the team for back-of-grid strugglers Coloni. The team was in a bad way, but they soldiered on. The reliability was not remedied throughout the season, and they ended the year scoreless. Before the 1989 season began, Julien found a buyer for his ailing team, a familiar face for those of you who have been here a while. Politician Cyril Derouvre. Derouvre took over the business side, while Julien stayed on as technical director. CDR brought on enough money to get the team to expand to a 2-car operation. Strife would re-up to drive car number 40, and the second car, car 41, was given to rookie Joachim Winkelhock. The car itself was simply an upgrade to the previous year's car. There were a few bodywork changes, a new Cosworth DFR in the back, and a new, albeit uninspiring, coat of paint. But they didn't implement an overhead airbox like a majority of the field did. All they had was a roll hoop. This would come back to bite them at the preseason tire test at Jacarepaguá. On the 3rd day of testing, Philippe Strife was involved in a violent crash at the Suspiro curve. No footage of the full crash exists anywhere on the web, but according to an assortment of testimonies over the years that I've read, he flipped over the curb, rolled multiple times, and crashed into the barriers at a speed of 155 miles an hour. By the time it was all over, Strife was rendered a quadriplegic, never to race again. The flimsy roll hoop had been completely sheared off in the crash, and it left Strife with catastrophic back injuries. His car was withdrawn for the season opener. Winkelhock would fail to pre-qualify. Strife would be replaced with Italian Gabriele Tarquini, fresh off of freeing himself from the sinking ship of First Racing. Tarquini would quickly take up Strife's vacated role as star driver. While Winkelhock would fail to get out of Friday morning, Tarquini would score an 8th-place finish at Imola, which easily could have been 6th had it not been for Alex Caffey and Thierry Boutsen's disqualifications being reversed. He was on pace for 5th at Monaco before an electrical failure. Closure would soon arrive, though, as he scored a 6th-place finish at the Mexican Grand Prix. He would be close to repeating his 6th place at Phoenix, but then his engine died with 2 laps to go. Montreal and Paul Ricard would be unassuming drives compared to what came before, but these results were promising until you look at the underlying numbers. Tarquini was lucky enough to not have to undergo pre-qualifying, an honor that his teammate Winkelhock did not share. If he had to, some of these solid performances would never have happened. As you probably know by this point, the top 4 performers in pre-qualifying are able to progress into qualifying proper. If Tarquini had to pre-qualify, his times would not have been able to clear him at Imola, Montreal, or Paul Ricard. That's concerning. Perhaps they knew this, and that is why, for the British Grand Prix, they debuted the new JH24, which was a shitbox. Tarquini would never see the starting grid again after Britain. Winkelhock quit the team after France, and his replacement Yannick Dalmas was not any more fortunate than he was. This was a collapse that hadn't been seen since Nigel Mansell in '84. After a promising start, AGS was sent panicking once again. '90 was a clean slate. After years of waiting, they finally moved out of the gas station and into a proper headquarters next to the Circuit des Var, where they tested on occasion. Dalmas and Tarquini would be retained for the year, and some upgrades were done to the JH24 to make it less of a dog. They had to pre-qualify again despite Tarquini's point, and that was a struggle through the year. The car was still comically slow. Yannick and Gabby would combine for 9 total starts with a best finish of 9th at Jerez. They would fail to qualify a whopping 23 times over the year. This was a total write-off of a year on the track, and they were still teetering on the edge of financial destitution into 1991. Financial restraints required the team to begin the season with a 1990 car, albeit with a fresh coat of paint. Tarquini would stay on, but Dalmas would be replaced with over-the-hill Swede Stefan Johansson. They would at least be spared the task of pre-qualifying, so that's a positive in a sea of negatives. Tarquini would bag an 8th the season-opening US Grand Prix, but then everything went to hell after that. Johansson would leave for Footwork Arrows after DNQing twice, and was replaced by rookie Fabrizio Barbazza, the 1986 Indy Lights champion. AGS would unknowingly make its final start in Monaco, with Tarquini qualifying in 20th and retiring after 9 laps with a clutch problem. After this, Derouve sold the team to 2 Italians with racing backgrounds, Gabriele Raffinelli, a touring car team owner, and Patrizio Cantu, the owner of Krypton Engineering, an F3000 team. It took AGS until it was uttering its death rattle for them to cart out a great livery. All the ones before it were uninspiring at best and retina-burning at worst. This new one, though? Cash. Unfortunately, it wouldn't make a race start with this new paint job. The final nail for the coffin for AGS came at the midway point, when the pre-qualifying order was reshuffled. The brand new Modena Lamborghini team had been outperforming them all year, so they got promoted to the big show, while AGS was demoted back to the basement. The thing that saved Modena was Nicola Larini's 7th place finish at Phoenix. That was all Modena had over AGS. Had that race gone differently, AGS probably would have been saved. They would only escape pre-qualifying twice after that. Their final appearance in the F1 circus would be at the Spanish Grand Prix at Catalunya. Tarquini was replaced for the weekend by Captain Crash Olivier Grouillard in some kind of power play maneuver, or desperation attempt, take your pick, and both cars would fail to survive Friday morning. They didn't even make an attempt to fly out for the final 2 races of the year, and then folded at season's end, bowing out with a whimper. Henri Julien would keep a low profile after AGS folded. He continued to live in Gonfaronnaises and continued to run the Garage de l'Avenir until he passed away in 2013, at the age of 85. The old building is now a bakery. Cyril Derouve would move on to buy out Équipe Ligier from its founder Guy in 1993, but that era didn't last long, as he found himself in trouble with the law for fraud. He would sell the Ligier team in 1994, and was sentenced to a suspended 18 months in prison for tax evasion in 1999. What a guy. Christian Vanderplein was hired by Krypton Engineering to be a race engineer for Luca Badoer in 1992, but he would never call a race for him. 2 months before the season begins, he was killed in a car accident at just 48 years old. Luca would then go on to win the championship. Ivan Capelli, we know all about Ivan Capelli. Let's move on. Philippe Strife would become an activist and ambassador for disabled drivers, as well as promoting charities dedicated to spinal injury and similar disabilities. He attempted to buy out the Ligier team from Derouve in 1994, but ultimately lost that bidding war to Flavio Briatore and Tom Walkinshaw. The day this video comes out marks 2 years to the day of his passing at the age of 67. Gabriele Tarquini would not be very successful at the F1 level, but he was one of the best touring car drivers the world had ever seen. He would go on to win the BTCC Championship, the ITC Championship, the European Touring Car Championship, and 2 WTCC Championships over his decades-long career. He retired from racing in 2021. Stefan Johansson would make quite a name for himself in kart after 1991, racing for Tony Bettenhausen's team for 6 years. He retired from racing in 2012 and moved on to being an agent. His most notable client? IndyCar legend Scott Dixon. Fabrizio Barbazza would make one last effort at F1 with Minardi, scoring 2 points in his career before making a move to sports cars. His career would end tragically in 1995 after a serious crash at Road Atlanta put him into a coma. He thankfully made a full recovery, and he now lives in Cuba. And so that is the story of AGS. They were the quintessential garagista, a team literally run out of a gas station in the countryside. They had a lot of promise behind them, but they were derailed so many times by so many things. Luck is a fickle thing, especially in racing. Alright, that's it from me. I have been Bobcat205, and thank you for watching. Merry Christmas, and see you next time.